So, hey, thank you again for everyone joining. This is really exciting. This is the first webinar in a series. This is building a fan base from scratch. And I'll introduce you to our speaker in just a bit, but this is, I'm Kadir, and I am from 30+1, for those of you that don't know. It is a community for independent music managers and artists who manage themselves. So welcome to our members that are out there, and welcome also to new people that are joining. You can check out more information on the site, which is 30plus1.co. I'll post the link later if you haven't seen it already. So as I mentioned, this is going to be the first in a series. So there's a couple more coming over the next couple of Thursdays at the same time. You can check the post on Instagram, and again at the end I'll post a link so you can see everything. But if you want to go to our Eventbrite page, you'll see everything that's coming up. So let's get to today's session. Today's session is about building a fan base from scratch, and so we're going to get taken through all those elements of that campaign to engage new fans. We've also been promised some insight into some of the activities that people normally miss, and particularly relevant for now, what you can do even during a pandemic, which I think everybody really wants to hear. The structure will be that we'll have a presentation, so you can just sit and listen, chill, and then that will be followed by Q&A. Do get involved in the chat, because I will keep a monitor on it, so you can chat throughout, and then I'll go back through and find the questions. There may also be some points where we post some polls, so get involved in those as well. You can contact each other individually, and you can contact me privately or Jessie privately, so we can do that. Or you could save all your questions for the Q&A session, and then we can just all get involved there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our speaker. It'll be nice. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing this myself. He has a popular YouTube channel on how to grow your fan base. So, I mean, let's assume he pretty much does know what he's talking about. And he's worked on the podcast and YouTube at Warner Music Group. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Get More Fans, and also YouTube music educator and manager, Jesse Cannon.
Hi there.
Hey.
Cool. I'm excited to get started. So yeah, you heard about my biography. What I like to say is I am a person who for the last 20 years has been really heavily documenting and studying what both breaks bands in marketing, and since I'm a producer, mixer, and mastering engineer, what breaks them creatively. So I like to say that I'm the person who's very rare in this business that operates on an understanding of the creative and an understanding of the marketing, and can bark at people on both sides about what's going wrong. And so that's where I like to see my perspective. So for the past 3 years, I've been documenting that in YouTube and podcast form. So today, obviously, we're going to talk about building a fan base. So the first thing that I like to say that I think people really miss is how much community makes a difference. Now, that can sound really cheesy and esoteric, but I want to talk about like what that practically is. And so in my time at Warner Music Group, a lot of what I did was I'd interview the artists right as we were building them up, and we'd get them better at doing long-term form interviews. We'd get them just learning how to tell their story way better. And so, but what I noticed is I'd hear their story and how they came up, and what it always would be is that they found some sort of community, and this was like almost without fail. And you know, sometimes that community is just that they worked with 12 producers, and then they finally got introduced to the one that really clicked, and they started making great songs with. Most of the time, though, what I thought was really interesting now, though, is that community ends up being like message boards, like whether it's a SoundCloud group, which kind of don't really exist anymore, so that's a little irrelevant. Facebook group, subreddit, weird message board for a community. So what I tell everybody is most days you need to be finding and strengthening your community. I tell everybody to set up like Google alerts, Talkwalker alerts. Find if you can afford it and you have a budget to have a reputation defending software, which are these things like mention.net, which will show you what you do is you put in all the groups that are similar to you, all the artists that are similar to you, and then you start seeing who's talking about them and where those communities are, what the blogs are, what the Twitter accounts that are really active in it, and you start just being a part of that community. Because when people see your name and as you do things, you start to accumulate being on people's radar. I think devoting time to this is one of the biggest things. But now with the coronavirus, I think this is even bigger because now this is the people who you should be doing co-headlines live streams with. You should be doing collaboration tracks. Right now, every bit of building a fan base, and I should say, it's always building a fan base is always about cosigns and collaborations. But particularly right now, it's even more so because if you think of a tour poster, that's used to be a cosign that they'd see some of you playing on a bill together. But now this is like all we have now that we can't be touring and doing things and we can't do high budget video shoots and things like that. So like even last night, like I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw Bethany from Best Coast is having like some of her favorite artists on, and then fans can call in and do a talk show. Other friends, I was talking to my friend Adam from this band Radiator King, and Adam is having a bunch of his favorite musicians come on, and they announced that for the live stream. And then other people are just making songs together and doing collaborative songs. You know, I saw the 1975 for the rollout for their record since they're about to drop like a record that means the world to them. Maddie, the singer, since he's an amazing talker, interviewed like Brian Eno, Stephen Reich, Stevie Nicks, Mike Kinsella, like all of these things of collaborating and finding your community and doing things with them now is kind of everything until this is done. And it always is everything, but right now, this is it. And this is where I think people don't devote enough of their time. And like even, you know, a great meetup like this of getting to know a different community in a chat, this is a huge thing. And I think like the other thing we have to remember is these are usually bonds that help you for years to come. Like I always use an example of like whether it's Porter Robinson and Madion, who now are both huge and collaborate on stuff and make their tours bigger. A group like Brockhampton, who all met on the internet, onto even like when the Used in My Chemical Romance came up in the 2000s, that they would take each other on tour for years to come, and one would get bigger than the other, and then the other would get bigger than the other, and it would be paying off for years. And now they're touring again together in 2020 if they can tour. So like I see it as that these are not only finding your community that rewards you because they end up being your friends, you have a lot in common with them, but it's also what rewards you for years to come as these connections. Like I joke when you leave music as an adult, like so many of my friends, you know, you go on to something else. It's like, you know, their furniture store ends up being helped by somebody they met in music. Like this is just stuff that works well for your music career and your rest of your life. So I think that that's really important. My next thing I talk about, which I feel like people are finally grabbing a clue about, is that we live in a singles world and your release strategy should reflect it. I still don't see people releasing as many singles as they should. The algorithms of Spotify and YouTube just make it so that you absolutely have to lean on singles because otherwise you're just missing opportunities. Every time you put out 5 songs at once, you're missing 4 of those opportunities that you potentially would have had if you put out a single. As well, what I've been telling everybody now is my format for everything I do, and I do adjust a little bit, but whenever I work on a marketing plan as I do, the audio stream first, then 2 weeks later I do a lyric video, and then 2 weeks later I do a music video or a visualizer. This is because the algorithms reward this, and really you have to keep pushing that song out. You have to keep doing eventful things because when you're an unknown artist, the biggest thing people are looking to see is that you're not that person we all know who gets motivated for 2 months, then disappears. They want to see people who are dedicated, and everybody in this like YouTube world of constant content is like now used to people who continually feed them content. And even if it's not their favorite thing, a lot of the time, at least it's something to do. And a lot of time they'll build that bond with you. We all experience when we're not super crazy about a song, but then we end up really crazy about it after a few listens. These reminded listens are everything. The thing I've been telling everybody is if you think of, we have different eras of music promotion. I now joke that we're in the Lil Nas X era, which pains me to say since I was sick of that song from the second time I heard it, and it definitely wasn't the last. But he did a revolutionary thing where he kept telling different stories about that song by creating all this content around that song just day after day. Like, it was truly, while that song I will never call a masterwork, what was a masterwork was him finding different ways to tell people a story about that song and show a different context to view that song in. And while I don't think everybody's super capable of doing that with every song, there is the way to tell the story more about why the visuals of the video meant something to you. Tell people about the experience creating it in the studio. Tell people about what you wrote it about. People miss so many opportunities to keep telling stories about that song and making content that shows the story of that song. And so the thing I bring back that's like a touchstone over and over to people is there's this MTV study, which I can drop in the chat, that says how much fans support the artists they feel a bond with. So much of like what we're doing, and I think what people miss the boat on social media is you're trying to build those bonds because then people support you. And what does support mean? Yes, it could mean streaming more or buying tickets to a show or your merch. But what it also means is that from time to time, they're going to share your stuff with their friends more because they want to have the bond they feel with you, somebody else to talk about it. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that's missed about music these days in marketing is when you strengthen those bonds. It's a thing. Like, I joke about it. My girlfriend and I hate Vampire Weekend. That's her favorite band, and she hates the 1975, and that's my favorite band. But we both want to talk about them all the time, and then it's frustrating in our relationship and kind of a joke because we can't talk to the other person about the thing that we do, and the other snickers at it, and it's like a thing. But my point to this is that, like, we all get so frustrated when our friends don't understand, because our friends are who understands us emotionally, and we want them to understand the other things emotional. And I think we now look to these artists we feel bonds with when we don't get that interaction with our friends, and we build that bond, but we still push it on our friends. It's one of the funniest things about music marketing, that when you get that, and like, when you watch the artists that are getting big these days, it's almost, I'd say 90% of the time, I can barely find exceptions to seeing that these are people who've gotten very good at expressing their vulnerability so that people build a connection with them. So I was talking about singles. um, so what I will now go back to in this is that obviously the big thing with singles is hitting submit in the back end of Spotify, hoping for the best with that, but also that you're putting out blasts so people are reminded of you. There's so many things competing for everybody's attention. So you have to be doing these constant reminders to get engaged with that relationship you're building with people and remind them to continue the relationship and not let it die. So that's singles. My next big point is uh, so many people don't remember that. So they think that all the streaming services have merit. But when you look in the analytics from pretty much any size artist, Apple Music is 15 to 20% compared to what Spotify is. Obviously, YouTube is a whole different game, but like streaming royalties, the whole game is Spotify. None of the other services really give you much marketing tools aside from Pandora, but Pandora is such a small audience that kind of doesn't matter. So I tell everybody that, like, if you're not in your Spotify profile doing playlists, making things that people can get engaged with, uh I would totally change that immediately. I have a video about all the things to do with Spotify, but Spotify presents the biggest return on investment there is right now. Is that if the amount of time it takes to do the strategy to make Spotify work is like 5 to 10 minutes a month, maybe 30 minutes. If you're not putting in that time, you're totally missing the boat on what it is. Now, in addition to that, what you should really be doing also is concentrating on followers. Now, Spotify obviously is changing things and they're not letting you just have followers. You have to also listen, but most people aren't clicking follow unless they're going to listen anyway. So I don't worry about that much. But what I do talk about is there's these Tone Den and Show.co campaigns where whenever you're linking content, whether it's YouTube videos, it can even be other artists' videos that you're just saying, I like this song. There's a follow button on that screen for you, and that can help boost those follows because we have to remember Spotify's own words are, if you have 100 followers, you'll be in 100 release radar playlists every time you put out new music. If you have 1,000 followers, you'll be on 1,000 playlists. And if you have 10,000, you get the point. So I tell everybody, you've got to lean into that. The next thing I tell everybody that every musician is pretty much fucking up is that they don't have a real YouTube strategy. So obviously I talked about putting out a stream, then a lyric video, then a music video every time you do a song. But I think there's even more to that. The music acts that are getting the most out of YouTube are the ones who've also learned how to show their personality and build those bonds. Just like I was saying about the bonds before. Yes, what you put in the caption of the Instagram is often more important than the picture. Sure, the picture lures people in, but like the bond you build there is it, and nothing builds a bond more than talking about something in your life or letting people get to know you through answering questions on YouTube on a very regular basis and then engaging in the comments. I mean, it really is where bonds are built these days, and YouTube rewards the artists who are doing that well. So I stress over and over and over again that taking the time to figure out what are the things that you can talk about, and that may be gear and recording or your instrument. It could be that you're into makeup and you're going to start doing makeup tutorials. You'll find some way to grow deeper bonds with fans and even pull in outsiders who will hear your music through this if you continually do that well. My next thing is to have some sort of a real world strategy. I think so many people forget that your local market now is even more easy to saturate because no one's doing it because everybody's so concentrated on online that they don't go in on making a spectacle in their local markets. What I tell everybody now is that, like, 3 nights of your life getting up flyers and posters in many places in small college towns. Like if you're a artsy type music, go to the closest liberal arts town and make a sensation, because college kids don't usually know better than to not think you're not a huge group if they just see your poster everywhere and they get curious because they're bored and they want things to engage with. So many groups miss out on merch. We now have on-demand merch printing. Uh, there's all these different merch services that you don't have to put any money down, and you could start making some money to fund your music if you have any fans at all. It's just a little bit of time effort. So I just continually push everybody to think more about the real world, because even just getting yourself up in 2 to 3 cities can often be a huge difference. As well, on that same type of thought run, I talk about niche promotion strategies, which is that, like, people also forget that like certain demographics are still really engaged in radio. If you're appealing to people older than 30, there's a lot of radio that still works. Satellite radio in America is still one of the biggest drivers, and running radio campaigns now are cheaper than ever because all of them are going out of business, the radio promotion companies, because no one's doing them anymore. So you can get amazing rates when you're an unknown artist that can really be in way better ROI than Facebook ads. So I tell people continuously to look into that. There's video promotion services to get your videos in places. If you're really making astounding videos, that can be really, really helpful. And then as well, like these niche promotion things, it can also be starting a podcast, or, you know, there's so many different things. You have to just think about where your audience is and how you get in from them. You know, I'm now seeing that there's just Twitch PR people for people who are really engaged in gaming. You have to think about where your audience is and where you can build bonds, and then think about another promotion strategy. The next thing I think people really miss is they don't even understand their story. The saddest thing about, maybe not the saddest, but a sad thing about the coronavirus is there's a lot of music writers who are out of work. Music writers are amazing at finding a story when there's barely anything there. So what I've been telling people now who don't understand their story is to see if they can hire a music writer to help write them a bio dash pitches for Spotify. Because they're very good at finding how to talk about something that's not very eventful and make it eventful. So I really do think like it's that thing of like a lot of artists need to be told like, no, this story is good. What you have here is something worth talking about. So if you aren't good at finding that, talk to people who actually do that for a living. The next thing I say is that you should spend a lot of time thinking about the images that reinforce your music's emotion. Give me 1 second to get some water. So what I mean by that is the thing I think so many people miss these days in the artists they love is that they have imagery that looks just like how their songs feel, and that a lot of time is spent in that. I sit in meetings all day where we take lookbooks and we post pictures on a wall of like what we think the artist's sound looks like. And I think so much of what people find, if you think about what people share, is when they see something remarkable. And what I think we all find remarkable is when we see that synergy of a really good image that feels like the song and accentuates that. And that could be an Instagram post onto a video. I don't think people take enough time to think about that. They just think like, oh, Logan Paul blows things up. Maybe I'll do that in my video. And then their video's a ballad and it makes no fucking sense. So I tell everybody to think more about that synergy. And I bet you if you look at your favorite groups, you can see some of that synergy, because I think that is a consistent thing with groups that succeed. My last somewhat nerdy point before I go into social media is to keep up databases. Being organized is everything, because slipping through cracks and inconsistencies are so easy to spot and let down so much momentum. I make checklists for every release I do. I even keep databases of the people who are interested in the artists I work with music, and make sure to contact them about everything and reach out individually. And we have checklists for the whole team to make sure that stuff happens. Get organized. You know, so many people get intimidated by spreadsheets. It takes under 10 hours to learn spreadsheets better than most people know how to do them. And it takes like 2 hours to be more competent than most people who use them for a living are. Don't get intimidated by spreadsheets. Okay, let's talk social media, because I got the hot take on that. Most of what people tell you about social media being what's going to build your fan base is fucking bullshit, especially tons of these YouTube promotion con artists. Social media works very well at a bigger scale above the first 10,000 fans. But before that, what social media is, and you actually have to engage in it, and you have to do the things, and you have to do all the posts we were talking about. But what we have to remember is what social media is when you're at the bottom and you don't have many fans yet, is making individual bonds one at a time with people. And it is arduous and unrewarding and unpleasant at first. and then it becomes more pleasant, and more easy. But the worst days of social media are the slog of not having fans. And so much of this is doing those connections and being consistent. What I tell everybody is you need to have a notepad of everything that you think of that's interesting, funny, and figure out how that gets on the social media. Every time there's a funny joke that's making your band laugh or your team laugh, you have to be thinking about how that gets out there. Every time you have an interesting thought on music or you observe something in somebody's song, whatever that is, whatever is going to be your brand on there, whatever, if it's taking cute pictures because you're an attractive person, you have to be obsessed with that and even be planning it out. At all times, you should have a notepad of what each day's posts are. Schedule the post for the week at a certain time. Be ahead of the game. And when you get a new one that's timely, you push another one back. But there needs to uh, be a real plan that happens. Otherwise, things are going to slip through the cracks. And yeah, I think especially now during this coronavirus thing, obviously we all have more time to plan and get ahead on things. It's not as easy to create content, but you can find a way. Get good with green screens is my best advice, and what everybody I've been seeing successfully do this, particularly if you watch the latest Charlie XCX video, is a pretty incredibly well done green screen stuff that they show the behind scenes of. But yeah, that is it. So I think we're ready for questions.
Okay. Okay, cool. So we will go to questions in just a sec, but I just wanted to pick up some of my questions first, which I get to do. So okay, so I know you kind of said that maybe social media isn't as helpful before you're up to thousands of followers, but let's just say I'm an independent artist. I have 2,000 follows roughly across my social media. I've got an album I'm releasing. I'm starting my release campaign. I've identified my singles. Like, what is your key, like, where exactly should I start? Like, what is the one, if I'm doing one thing, what should it be in essentially building, from zero to low fan base?
So the first thing I do is a SWOT analysis. So if anybody's not familiar with this is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So I try to understand what the strong things are and the weak things are for social media. So obviously you're funny. You should be leaning on Twitter because Twitter is going to be better for joke spreading. If you're good at being performative, you should be leaning on TikTok. But I think it's identified strengths. If you're a really attractive person, Instagram is going to be way better for you than Twitter. I mean, Twitter can do good with that too if you post the thirst traps. But I think about, trap. Yeah, I mean, we all got to do it. I would think first about what the strengths are. And then what I try to do is that same thing I talked about with the community, is the targeting that you do is look at what other people are doing and what gets good engagement. Really studying that and then finding what other artists like you that are bigger than you, I should say, but are similar to you in sound, because the community, so much of this is cultural too. What works? I work with punk groups, pop groups, weird emo groups, and even punk and emo, as related as they are, can totally different things work for that stuff. And I find that you really got to observe what culturally has currency and that you can do well and find the bond with that. But the big thing, and the reason I just get, so much advice of social media is do what big famous people are doing. I think really what I was talking about before is it's building those bonds with people. Maybe I didn't go long enough on this, but even down to that, every time somebody comments on your YouTube and you're only going to have, let's say, 10 comments, is you need to ask them a question or open up something that keeps a conversation going, because those bonds and talking to every one of those first fans is so much. I mean, it's even crazy to think about, when Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber first were getting big, you could see that they were on Twitter doing 20 threads long discussions with their fans still. And like, people forget that that's the, like, I even, I point to, like, there's this video of if people are familiar, there's this group City Morgue, and like their first video is like the scariest video you'll ever see. It's like them shooting heroin, pointing bazookas at cop cars, like and it's looks 100% real. It's fucking insane. But what do those guys do all day? They talk to their fans on Instagram comments all day long. Like, they say 6-7 hours a day, and they face tattooed guys who look fucking insane, but they get that that's the game, and that is the game, especially when you haven't really blown up yet.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And my last question before we go to opening up was, you spoke about YouTube strategy. Can you talk me through, like, what is a YouTube strategy other than just posting videos?
So the questions I ask the artists I work with is like, what is an interest outside of just your songs that you have that you think maybe your fans probably also have? So here's a great example. It's like, I work with a really like a band that's almost famous for being homeless, even though they have millions of plays on social media because the world is weird. So we're developing like a cooking on the cheap video series where he cooks with other artists in that genre. Another great example would be like, there's this artist Tessa Violet, and she just hangs out with her friends and then just talks about what it's like being a young person in their early 20s, and just talks about the common emotions that everybody has, and does Q&As. Yet again, figuring out what your strengths are. Like, every artist has a different one that is like an outside interest. Figuring out what that is and then going, how do I turn that into a channel, is the thing. Like, I was talking about 1975 before. Maddie is the best speaker, probably the most eloquent rock star we've had in decades. So him going on and talking intellectually about politics or creativity with Brian Eno is the easiest one on earth, because every person who hears it is never going to go, oh, that was boring. It's like, no, this is like the most engaging conversation because he's an amazing speaker. Identifying what your strengths are. Your strengths can be real shallow. Like I was saying, it could be fucking makeup tutorials. Like, cooking ramen is not the most intellectual thing, but it will work if that's what your audience connects to you with.
So kind of letting people get to know you, finding a way for your fans to get to know you, essentially.
Yeah, get to know you through a strength that you're going to be good at conveying. Like, the key has to be also
you've got to be good at it.
Well, I would say this, that like, it's like a funny thing about musicians is like, musicians are often terrible at talking about making their music. But then it's really funny because I'm sitting in the studio with them all the day. And what are they really good to talk about? Maybe relationship advice sometimes. Some of them particularly are like amazing at talking about home DIY repair. Like, they all get into home repair after they buy a home because they buy some cheap home and then fix it up when they're not on tour. And yet they can talk about that better than they could talk about tuning their guitar. Find that thing that you can talk about better than tuning your guitar.
I get that. Okay, let's go to questions. So we've got a couple that have been posted during the session. So I guess I'll just read those out and we can go through them. And what we can do with the others after we've gone through that is if you do a virtual raise of your hand, if you've got a question following the three we've already got, then I'll unmute you and you can ask Jessie yourself directly. So we've got the first question here from James. Mm-hmm. How do you cheaply make visualizer and lyric videos?
Okay, so visualizers, there's a couple different services that basically have predetermined stuff. You upload a couple colors and they're gonna have shapes. Video Bolt is one I just used for a project, but truly, if you Google how do you visualizer services, you're gonna get 12 of them on your Google search. You find the right one for the price point and for the visuals you like. and do that. And then as well, funny enough, like in a lot of these Reddit communities, there's lots of people who are volunteering visualizers. It's like funny, like there's two artists I follow that I know from a community that like, I'm like, oh, you guys are both using that free one somebody put on Reddit with just different color schemes. Like visualizers are just there to give the eyes something to do while it's up. It's an excuse to have something on YouTube. So I wouldn't go so crazy with it. Lyric videos. I made a video on how to do them for free in an hour in DaVinci Resolve, which is free software. It's pretty damn easy to make a easy lyric video, but I also would argue like one of the better lyric video techniques is also just like doing pictures of a lyric where you've painted a picture or you've written out your handwriting and you just go frame by frame with that. They can be all sorts of things. The lyric video really is for the person who wants to go in deeper on what you're thinking or know how to sing along to the song without embarrassing themselves in front of their friends. As long as you get it made, no one's like the thing I say in my video on lyric videos is it's comedic to watch how many of them have 60 million views that are like made in iMovie. You can do better than that with just a little bit of creativity.
Cool. Yeah. So from Phil, we have, do you suggest releasing the 3 videos you mentioned before releasing the track on digital streaming platforms or releasing it physically?
So the way I say to do it is when you go up on DSPs and YouTube on the same day with just a stream in a single screen video on YouTube, 2 weeks later, lyric video, 2 weeks later, music video, and repeat over and over. I have a video on how Billie Eilish, Pale Waves, and Kim Petras were doing this and how they really use these singles as the strategy to build up their fan base. It's the way to sustain attention around a song, and especially when you're a small artist and you're not huge like them. You just need this attention building thing to do. But yeah, you need it out there. Like one of the big things I should say, this is probably a great thing to talk about on the subject, is like teasing content is over. It is so rare you can get anybody's attention when you're a small artist. So wasting it when you don't have something for them to bite on and being like 8 days till my single drops, you just wasted an opportunity that somebody might have listened to you. Now there's good things to do to remind people, but Amy Thompson, who's Swedish House Mafia's old manager, she has a thing of like the biggest reversal was that most of the promotion for a record used to be after the record was out. We are now in the thing where basically the day you put out your record, it's more done than any time. Like, yes, you could still be touring on it, but really like the digital promotion is near dead by the time your record's out. Which is why you see so many groups like there's a big thing with Bring Me Horizon that they're like, I don't think we should ever make a record again. Like, why bother? We're more rewarded from singles. Have those out in advance.
Yeah, and I was my last release, what the one before the last that I worked on, one of the release campaigns I worked on, we found that whenever we release content, we get loads of engagement on it that would literally die in a day. It's like it was you always had to do something every day or every other day.
Even watching some huge artists at Atlantic Electro, like watching the campaigns when looking at the analytics, are like, these are people's favorite artist, and you still watch that in 48 hours. You're like, oh, that's over with, huh?
Yeah, no one's cooking that anymore.
we worked really hard for that to not last. Now, what does last though? Music videos. They actually have incredibly long legs, which is crazy, but like everything else, not so much.
Yeah. Okay. So Shamala has a question. She is I'm new to artist management with little experience. However, I have been given the chance to manage an artist. How would you suggest starting? And I just want to say hi Shamala, and thanks for joining because you sent a message earlier.
So organization is a lot of the key, I suggest. And then that same thing I was talking about, the SWOT analysis, I have a video on that too. start identifying what's going to work and what needs improvement in every artist. And I think like one of the funny things is people like when we talk about improvement, improvement is everything from just that you need to meet a better video director onto that you're not that good at writing harmonies yet, and that's something that you need to be doing. Looking your weaknesses in the eye is one of the hardest things. um I live it every day. I go through it myself. Like I was telling an artist the other night that like I don't think I actually looked in a mirror for a month for a while recently because I was just like, I know I'm going to look exhausted, so I like closed my eyes when I'd wash my face and things like that. And I'm like, I don't want to see what it looks like. And I think a lot of people do that with their weaknesses in music too, is they don't want to acknowledge like, shit, I'm terrible at writing harmonies, but if I want to be a pop star, harmonies are everything. So if I'm not working with a producer who's amazing at it, then I have to do it. And you have to look these things in the eye. Start looking what your strengths are, and you can be played off of what your weaknesses are that you can do, what maybe some of your connections are. Like I even talk about like an opportunity. Sometimes the opportunity is your best friend has a storage space above their store that is a place to film music videos. Think about everything you have it on a list so that every time when you're looking at that list and you're handed like what's our next move, you can make it off of those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Cool. Yeah, I'm totally second to everything you said there as well. So we have a question from Frederick. The question is, the artists who buy fans on Instagram as a strategy of increasing their fan base, is it a good encouraging strategy for an artist or not? Is it a good route to go down?
So this is where every con artist asshole who has a YouTube channel or Facebook ad campaign is ripping off artists. Nothing is less effective when you have under 10,000 fans, but there is a scale where it works. Somewhere like what I like to call around the 100,000 monthly listeners phase, it becomes very effective to target other similar artists on Facebook and Instagram. The problem is small artists do that. It's do it. You know, the biggest problem with advertising and paying for things is that you don't know if people are susceptible to liking it yet. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're putting $3,000 into advertising and $1,000 into the production of your song. You could be advertising something that doesn't work very well. Whereas the artist that's already gotten 100,000 fans, there's people seem to be liking it. When they hear it, they sign on. But what I would argue is most of the artists that are at under 10,000 fans usually need to be putting more money into developing better things, whether that's a better music video or just better production on their song, better mixing, whatever that is, because people are just not susceptible to liking that song. They're hearing it and it's not going well. And usually those advertising campaigns are not going well for them. So I really discourage against that until you hit, there's a good point when you're about, let's call it that 50 to 200,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, where that can really help you grow to a next plateau. But then as well, then there becomes a point that the fans are just doing so much of the talking. It's so much more effective that money's somewhat wasted because you already have enough fans that they're spreading the word.
Okay, makes sense. We have a question from the chat now. So I'm going to go to James. Let's see how this works. Hey, James.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. Hi, Jesse. How are you? Thanks a lot.
Good.
Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Really quick question. So you mentioned Spotify being the majority thing to focus on when it comes to streaming. Mm-hmm. Cool. Have you had any success using the in-house Spotify pitch feature? And if so, do you notice any trends there in regards to when it works and when it doesn't work?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I have had success with that. But what's interesting with that is, and I need to make a video on this, but what seems to be successful back there. So I should preface this with, my girlfriend works at one of the largest music distributors and she pitches Apple Music and Deezer for a living. And then her coworker who we hang out with all the time pitches Spotify. So when I'm at dinner, I'm pretty much talking about this. What we see is that artists who are just putting out their first song or two, that never works. That's just, you got to be seeing your first songs as something to build up. But what does work very well is identifying a niche. Right now, the Spotify playlists that are easiest to get on that are small are like a lot of these emerging micro genres. So like, here's a good example is like, there's one I follow called Hyperpop, which has big artists like Charlie XCX on it, but also has tons of artists who, before being added to that, don't have 5,000 monthly listeners. There's all these micro genre things and then like micro interest things that internally do well, but you have to, in your pitch, alert Spotify to that you're doing that. But I would also say that, and like they need to do a better job at educating this, that like no one's first 3 songs are usually getting added to that you need to see the first few as momentum building within your community and do the best you can on promoting within those message boards in your community and getting yourself bolstered before you do that, because Spotify we got to remember, they want to retain people. And if you're like, cool, I like that song, and then you go to their profile and there's only 2 songs to listen to, your likelihood of dropping off or going back to that playlist is not good. And then you're going to start and you're going to go on YouTube, and that's what they don't want.
Okay, that makes sense, because if I just follow that up really quickly, still on the same topic.
Yep.
As you say, there are lots of micro genres and niches in regards to all the smaller official Spotify playlists. But when you do attempt to submit an official pitch, it's not as if you can say, hey, I'm trying to submit for your curation for playlist X, Y, or Z. And you've just got like the little field to insert information into. And yes, I get what you're saying about, your first few releases just being something for you to build from the ground up individually with people like one-on-one, online and in real life. But let's say you get past that point and then you use the in-house pitching feature. Would you ever like do the research beforehand and figure out, okay, these are the specific genre playlists where I think, and then actually mention that in the text space that you have?
That is literally what we do. So like a great example is like, no one does any of those pitches without knowing which ones they're trying to say keywords to. And like a funny thing is like, let's say you're pitching to Hyperpop, you may even say the synonym. So some people call Hyperpop bubblegum bass. So you'll use that synonym because it's almost like code to say, I'm part of this community, I know the lingo.
Right, but you wouldn't really.
Yeah, well, I would actually say both in the pitch. Like I might say, James Cha's new single, the hyperpop banger, that calls to mind images of the bubblegum bass of this artist.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Sorry, guys, I'm on mute. Okay, thanks. Doesn't that happen every Zoom call? But anyway, thanks for that, James. Okay, we have another question here for you, Jesse, from Austin. He says, my current band has a lot of songs that we've had for years, and they have no lyrics, videos, visualizers, or music videos. Should we make that content for our old songs or wait until we release new music?
So this is an interesting one too, is what I see a lot of people do, especially if they're going to try to shop themselves before their next release, or they're going to try to make pushes, that they do a back catalog modernization push, is the way I called it, which is that like right before you ramp up, and there's somebody I just saw do this. Oh, I slept so bad last night, I'm never going to remember it. But yeah, you do like kind of like a modern content dump, let's call it 30 days before you start your next campaign for your new music. Of that, you do all this stuff so people start seeing your name again. Your numbers go up, so people are like, oh, well, that looks good. And you look good to the playlist you're pitching to. You look good in any prospective team members you're pitching to, because your numbers are up, because your numbers are not all down. Like, it makes a huge difference. I mean, if I'm being honest about my struggles, like one of the bands I represent right now is 5 years off an album cycle, and we're shopping to distributors, and I have to be like, every time I'm like, our numbers are good, but just remember we're 5 years off album cycle. Like, imagine how good they're going to be when we're on album cycle. And you know what people don't like doing? Imagining anything. The music business is not
Very risk
full of
averse
imaginative
now.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest thing you learn, that even at the top, like, I will say there's exceptions. Like, there's some people I worked with at Atlantic that have the vision of hearing somebody do a voice memo with a ukulele to say that's a hit, and they're totally right. But most people have no vision of how a song could go or what an artist's potential is. You have to spell everything out for them. So doing that back catalog push is really crucial if you're going to be going for a big push. Yeah. Especially you're going to be putting a lot of effort into your next content. How easy it is to get some of that stuff out there is really easily. It's low effort for big reward.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess also thinking about having everything all synced up and ready for that, that's part of that as well, I guess.
Yes.
Getting your branding kind of consistent across everything ready. That's all part of that preparation stage, I imagine.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said too for when you take your old catalog and modernize it. It's also will get you thinking about some things. We all know every time we do something, we make a mistake. And having your head in the game before you do this all really, really helps, because you're like, oh, we could do that lyric video better for our next single because I learned this bad lesson about the dumb thing I fucked up on that lyric video. So I think that's a great exercise.
Cool. Do we have any more questions out there? I think we've gone through all the Q&A.
I see the one about the variant of the Last Supper, which is
oh, did I miss one?
There's one at the bottom of the chat. So this is the cover of my last
go
book,
for
which
it.
is on
Yeah.
music creativity. And yes, I took 170 hours to paint what my influences are as an artist. I put it on the cover of my book. But yeah, that is a variant on the Last Supper. I found a high resolution picture of it and did that. So but yeah, that's the cover of my book, Processing Creativity.
Okay, yeah, so the quote is for anyone that missed it. That was one of the questions, because I don't know if I don't think you guys can see the questions. I'm not sure. Okay, cool. Well, Jesse, thank you. That was
This
super
was really fun.
Yeah, no, it was really fun, and yeah, really appreciate it. Super useful. I am just thinking now, just in terms of Jesse and I spoke about some polls potentially before, just to kind of see who's out there in the audience, and I guess maybe it's good as well for you guys, if you want to interact with each other, to know who's doing what or whatever. And we haven't done a poll as yet, so maybe I'll quickly launch one, and then we'll see what happens with that. But also, it would be good to have, oh, there it is, people who are out there, drop in the chat just what you are working on and what you might use from what you've heard today in your project. Maybe we could think about that. But also, and I know I'm throwing a few things out there now, so it would be good to see what comes up in the chat. But the other thing was, Jesse and I were also talking before, and what I like to do is push people to take some action after they've listened to something, because there's just so much content out there. Jesse, I don't know if you can set something that maybe, I don't know, people could do if they've got a single release coming up, and then if people can then post it on a post that I'll create on the Instagram account, we will pick one person from that who Jesse's going to kindly send one of your books. Which one?
Yep. They can have a choice of which one they'd like.
Oh, nice.
So whoever wins, they can choose between the two.
Okay, cool. So what do they need to do? What should be the...
You had a good idea before. Now I can't think of it because I'm so tired.
I know, me too. That's what
I had a big interview this morning, and so I didn't sleep because I was like scared because I was interviewing like a governor of a.
No, it's fine. I will get to it, but let's see what's on the poll. So, who's been okay? So we have most people who are listening who have been involved in a release in the last 12 months. So obviously this is super relevant for people. And for most people, for those who they produced a single image and video. Jesse, why was that one of your questions? Because was it about saying that you shouldn't just produce a single video?
Yeah, that so many people think it's just a music video or just a lyric video or just a single screen video when it should be all three.
Yeah. Okay, so so that's one thing that people should do then, is produce as much content around the single as they can.
Yep.
What you're saying.
Yep.
Okay. So okay, so yeah, still time to post in the chat, say hi to people, let us know if you're an artist or a manager, if you've got a release coming up, what it is, what you're gonna. Okay, here it is. I know what the action's gonna be. Okay, so if you could post one takeaway that you have from this session, the takeaway that you're going to actually take action on, and when you've done it, if you post what you've done as a comment to a post that I'll post on the Instagram account, which is just 30+1, then we will pick from those comments one person who I'll direct message and sort the book out. How does that sound? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll do that. We'll do that in the next couple of days, because I think if people don't pick something that they're going to do right away, then you're probably not going to do it. So pick the action that you're going to do and post it in the comments on the Instagram account. And please do keep sharing. I know, like, some of the best things, before the pandemic, we had our physical meetups, and one of the best things about it was obviously the contacts that you make and the connections that you make with people here, which is why I'm encouraging people to post in the chat, let people know what you're doing, share your email address or share a link to your webpage or whatever, so that we can all still make those connections even virtually. Okay, so we're coming actually up to the hour, which is great. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to say, Jesse, or anything you wanted to end on. And I'm just taking a quick look at the chat. Oh, this is good. Oh, cool. People are posting what action they're going to take. This is cool. Going to take action on all of these. That's a bit of a cheat. We need to pick. You got to pick one, and you got to put it on Instagram. Okay, great. Frederick, hey, he's an artist manager. Okay, cool. This is good. People are getting involved. So I'm actually gonna close it off now. Again, thanks so much. This has been really fun. This was my first webinar that I have co-hosted. I mean, I know you did most of the heavy lifting, Jesse, but actually I thoroughly enjoyed it. So
this is very fun.
I'm glad. Thank you. Yeah, so if you guys want to continue the discussion, so I'm just about to end the meeting, but if you want to continue the discussion, you can head over to the website 30plus1.co, and there'll be a discussion thread there as well, or you can head over to the Instagram account and maybe carry on in the comments. So we'll see. What I will do is I'll follow up with all of Jesse's socials as well, and a website link to the follow up to this, where you'll get the recorded content and the questions and things like that as well, if that sounds cool. Okay, well, thanks everybody. And hopefully see you at the next one. We have another webinar which will be discussing working in the music industry post-lockdown, same time next week. So yeah, we'll do that. Okay, thanks everyone, and goodbye.